Chapter 911. Strange Scene. Klein looked down at his palm as his eyes reflected the gold coin. It was heads. This meant that Klein should use the marionette's eyes to look at himself. After receiving this revelation, Klein remained hesitant. He pondered about holding a ritual to send Enzo above the gray fog. Doing so was relatively safer, allowing the damage and corruption his spirit body suffered to be completely screened by the environment before making an attempt. However, he suspected that he wouldn't receive an outcome. This was because Beyonders of the Fate pathway were noticing the projection of the mysterious space on his body. Above the gray fog, that uniqueness might no longer exist. It was like an attempt to observe an elephant's body. Instead of doing it outside, he was doing it internally. Pressing his fingers together, he clenched the gold coin in silence for a long while before making up his mind. He suddenly stood up, took out a ritual dagger, and created a wall of spirituality to isolate the room. This was to prevent anyone from hearing the possible screams or strange commotion. Immediately after that, Klein set up a ritual and sacrificed creeping hunger above the gray fog. He was afraid that the glove would turn on him when something happened to him. This was a fixed trait of creeping hunger itself. Once it didn't have its fill and couldn't secure a schedule of eating one person a day, it would view its wearer as food, and Klein starved it more often than he fed it. After doing all the preparations in a meticulous and orderly manner, Klein reached out to take the flower of blood from Enzo and wore it on his left palm. This ensured that he could recover even if he suffered any serious physical damage. At the moment he was about to wear it, Klein thought for a moment and paused. Taking a piece of paper, he wrote, "Remember to take off the ring." He was worried that he wouldn't take flower of blood off after his experiment, due to his lowered intelligence.
When that happens, perhaps I need a beautiful princess to wake me up with a kiss. No, take off my ring.
Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh and exhaled. Removing his outerwear, he wore the ring. Then, he cast his gaze at his new marionette, Winner Enzo. The sense of crisis and nervousness was inevitable, but as long as he made up his mind, the experienced him could only forge ahead without flinching. After doing some adjustments and entering a state of cogitation, Klein made the marionette slowly turn around to look at him. With the winner's eyes, he first saw a layer of thin, emanating grayish-white fog. Amidst the fog, there was a resplendent door of light that was tainted with bluish blackness. The door of light was formed from countless layers of spherical light. Each spherical light enveloped squirming maggots. Some of them were transparent, others translucent. They had complicated and indescribable symbols and patterns that had profound meanings. Before Klein could discern the actual details, he felt his mind buzz as he lost consciousness. After an unknown period of time, he slowly woke up. He had momentarily lost his memory, almost imagining that he had slept till daybreak.
What happened? It's still dark outside.
Klein sat up with a push of his hands, only to realize that he was on the ground. At this moment, he caught sight of Enzo through the corner of his eye. Plenty of scenes and voices suddenly surged through his mind.
That's right. I was trying to figure out what Beyonders of the Monster pathway can see from my body. I suffered too much stimulation and fainted immediately. I still vaguely remember painful screaming. Was that me?
Klein, who had recovered his memories, hurriedly inspected his condition. He was surprised to see a bloody, gruesome wound on his body, as though something was about to tear out of it. At this moment, flesh was squirming in the wound, reforming at an abnormally fast speed. Klein then looked to the ground and saw that there was blood that had outlined a silhouette of where he was lying down.
Thankfully, I wore flower of blood. Otherwise, I might have slowly died due to the heavy injuries brought about by the breakdown of my body. After I resurrect, I wonder if I'll be in a human form or a monster form.
Klein raised his hand and rubbed his temples as he scanned his surroundings. He found that the furniture had toppled, but the wall of spirituality remained intact. He heaved a sigh of relief, confirming that the abnormality was only limited to himself and a small area around him. Nothing had spread. And from the speed at which his wound was recovering at, Klein determined that he hadn't been unconscious for more than a minute. He picked up the chair and sat down, feeling as though he had forgotten something, but he just couldn't recall what. Only when he instinctively cleared the area did he see a note with the words, "Remember to take off the ring." Only then was he enlightened as he removed the golden ruby ring on his left hand. More memories surfaced as Klein shook his head and muttered with a lingering sense of fear and amusement.
Luck is really important at times. If the negative effects of the flower of blood randomly reached its peak potency, I might not be able to recognize those words and fail to be reminded.
Seeing that he had mostly recovered from his wound, he made Enzo wear flower of blood and take off green essence. Using the latter's treatment, Klein no longer felt any discomfort. He focused his attention back on the scene he saw. It was a scene that Beyonders of the Fate Pathway saw on him. A door of light, tainted with bluish black. Countless spherical lights, transparent and translucent maggots clumped together. Symbols and patterns that are mystically complicated, hiding plenty of knowledge but giving zero feedback to others.
What do these represent? This is a particular mythical creature form that corresponds to the mysterious space above the gray fog. It's one that belongs to a sequence 0 true god. Due to the gray fog screening, only Beyonders of the Fate Pathway can see it directly, suffering the visual impact and corruption. Likewise, it's also because of the gray fog screening that those Beyonders don't directly break down as though they are seeing a deity with their own eyes, while also not receiving any knowledge.
Klein thought for a moment and began to use divination to decipher the hidden meaning.
The door of light seems to resemble the symbol behind the apprentice's chair. It might also point to Mr. Door. Countless stacked spherical light is identical to my cogitation, and the latter stems from the mythical systems as described by some novels from Earth. Influenced, my subconscious chose the most relevant and closely matching memory. Or could it be that my choice influences the expression of the scene from the gray fog? The distorted and transparent maggots are similar to the clump of maggots on the gigantic throne on the main peak of the Hornassus mountain range, but there are some tiny differences. That sequence 0, the Fool of the Seer pathway, I didn't manage to see the translucent ones clearly. It's hard to tell. Also, the bluish-black color keeps making me connect it to the depths of the mysterious space that I can't reach. Back when I stood on the highest step of the staircase of light, I could see some hints of bluish-black on the cloud-like mass that condensed in midair.
Klein thought about it for quite some time, but failed to receive an answer. All he could do was keep it at the back of his mind and analyze it when he had more information and clues. After clearing the scene, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the gray fog. He planned on doing a thorough inspection of his physical condition and confirm if Enzo still had any passive luck or bad luck. Bayam, in the poverty district, in a dilapidated house that wasn't too big. Admiral of Stars Catalea was sitting behind a table looking at the door when she heard a unique knocking pattern on the door.
Come on in.
She didn't deliberately disguise her voice. The wooden door creaked open as the hanged man walked in, wearing a hooded black robe. Seeing his suspicious disguise, Catalea nudged her heavy glasses and said with a smile,
If you were to walk out like this, you would be surrounded by the members of the Church of Storms within 5 minutes.
She didn't wear any disguise because she knew that the matter of her permitting Gehrman Sparrow to board the Future had long spread across the seas. It wasn't difficult for the hanged man to guess that Admiral of Stars was Ma'am Hermit. Alger didn't directly reply to her. As he closed the door, he pulled out a chair and snapped back.
It's the same for you.
He meant that Admiral of Stars was just second to Admiral Hell amongst the 7 pirate admirals. Furthermore, she was suspected to have deep connections to Gehrman Sparrow. She was a target of pursuit by the Church of Storms and Church of Evernight. Her bounty had risen to 45,000 pounds, and no matter which city she was in, it only spelled trouble once she was recognized, due to not being disguised. Catalea nodded slightly and turned to look at the hanged man's hooded face.
In front of me, such a disguise is meaningless. However, I respect your choice.
She continued wearing her glasses.
She has a domineering stance and great confidence, as expected of the Admiral of Stars.
Alger, who was wearing a mask under the hood, didn't harp on the disguise as he went straight to the point.
Thank you for providing me with assistance.
Catalea placed her right hand on her left elbow.
I'm curious. With your present strength and the resources you have, you should be able to resolve the artisan's problem even without my help. Why are you being excessive?
Alger was already prepared as he succinctly replied.
I do not wish to become a topic of discussion for others.
Catalea seemed to grasp the meaning in between the lines. Pondering for a few seconds, she said,
I need more information.
Alger nodded lightly and said,
According to my observations and guesses, the artisan is likely controlled by those who believe in the primordial moon. The latter belong to the original faction of the southern continent, not the traders of the life school of thought.
Catalea's expression remained unperturbed as she thought for a moment.
Why don't you find Mr. Moon? He should be very interested in such matters.
Alger curled his lips and replied in a normal tone.
If we aren't able to resolve it, I might do so.
Chapter 912, Origins of the Artisan. Catalea understood the hanged man. If the problem was too serious, they could use the moon to involve the entire sanguine race. They could then minimize their losses in the chaos and obtain some benefits. She then smiled and said,
If the situation is that serious, why not directly find the world? That seems to make things simple.
Alger remained silent for a few seconds before saying,
I have to prove my ability at handling problems. Therefore, that's the final resort.
After hearing his reply, Catalea immediately made some connections.
The hanged man places great importance on the way Gehrman Sparrow views him. It's because he's a blessed of Mr. Fool. Also, his attitude is rather identical to the political jokes of Backlund and Trier. When facing a problem or having committed a mistake, the first reaction is to suppress the matter and find other methods to resolve it. They cannot let their superior or consignor know about it. This means that the hanged man was once or is currently a member of a powerful faction with a strict hierarchy. It influenced him and made him grasp similar traits. The Church of Storms? No, such a person would be an oddity. The fleet of the King of the Five Seas?
Amidst her thoughts, the pirate admiral nudged her heavy glasses and steered the topic back.
Continue describing the artisan.
Alger appeared to have prepared a script. Without any thought or pause, he said in an unhurried manner,
To hide this artisan's identity, to prevent this resource from being wielded by others, I deliberately constructed the identity of him being part of the Church of Steam. But in fact, he had no choice but to create items for unaffiliated beyonders to earn money, to maintain his lifestyle of enjoying fine wine and beauties. He betrayed the Church of Steam and hid in Byam. This time, he first contracted a strange disease and was monitored by an unknown person. Later, he seemed to be under control of people who believe in the primordial moon, claiming that he could receive new life.
Catalea finished listening attentively as her eyes with a purple tint appeared extremely focused. After the hanged man finished his recount, she pondered and asked,
An artisan definitely has no lack of mystical items. Furthermore, they know all the combinations of different Beyonder effects and negative effects. Their strength is definitely at sequence 5. What methods did those primordial moon believers use to control this artisan without harming him? A demigod was involved?
Alger slowly shook his head.
There aren't any clues regarding that, but based on my observation, the artisan has expressed some willingness. I suspect that, while being threatened and coerced, there are elements of them targeting his weaknesses to entice him.
He had indirectly denied the theory that a demigod was involved. Catalea nodded.
How did those primordial moon believers find this artisan? Based on your description, this artisan only trades with trustworthy friends he's familiar with. He doesn't enjoy widening his channels, and he can be said to be extremely cautious.
Alger hesitated for a moment and said,
I'm not too sure, but I have a theory. I once helped the world sell a werewolf Beyonder characteristic to that artisan, and the werewolf pathway belongs to the mutant pathway. Be it the formulas or characteristics, They are firmly in the control of the Rose school of thought. There are seldom any leaks.
Cattleya added inwardly, having figured out the hanged man's theory.
Likewise, those people who believe in the primordial moon in the southern continent basically belong to the Rose school of thought.
He suspected that the werewolf beyonder characteristic had a latent problem that involved a secret existence. This resulted in the Artisan being targeted by the Rose school of thought. And this was also the reason why the Rose school of thought firmly wielded control over the mutant pathways formula and characteristics. Cattleya raised a few more questions and obtained satisfactory answers. Finally, she asked,
What's that artisan's name? What country is he from?
He's from Intis. He calls himself Sea Elf.
Alger replied straight away.
Sealf.
Cattleya frowned slightly as she repeated the artisan's name softly.
What's wrong with that?
Upon seeing this, Alger directly asked,
You've heard of him?
From Alger's point of view, Admiral of Stars was an experienced powerhouse with a powerful background and was good at controlling herself. If she hadn't wished to discuss Sealf, she wouldn't have made it so clear even if she had her suspicions and questions. Due to this, he chose to ask without mincing his words. After a moment of silence, Cattleya said,
Emperor Rosel's eldest son is CL. It's very similar to that name.
Without waiting for the hanged man to say a word, she continued,
This prince passed away due to his horror and concerns shortly after the emperor's assassination. Back then, the Sauron family wished to hang or exile his descendants, but the Church of Steam chose to take them in as clergymen.
Alger nodded slightly in enlightenment.
You suspect that he's a descendant of that prince?
In most countries in the northern continent, like Intis and Faesac, it was common for people to use their ancestor's name, or something similar as their names. It represented the legacy of honor. Therefore, the more illustrious a family was, the more common it was to have the second or the third. Of course, it was also very common for two people to have similar names. But Artisan Sealf wasn't only a name. He was from the Church of Steam, a person from Intis, and had reached the level of artisan. Faced with the hanged man's question, Cattleya nodded gently.
I can quickly make a confirmation if you can obtain his blood.
Understanding the reason, Alger didn't ask further. Instead, he asked,
Are you going to take action now? I can provide support.
Cattleya's glasses reflected the crimson moonlight that shone inwards.
No, I plan on observing for some time. At the very least, we need to understand why the people who believe in the primordial moon are trying to control Artisan Sealf. If they only wish to get the artisan to work for them and create mystical items, the situation becomes a lot more simple. And if they have other goals, the problem might be more complicated than we imagined. We will need to make more preparations.
As expected of the Admiral of Stars, Alger nodded and said,
I can't stand by him for too long, or else I will incur suspicion. If you need my assistance, it needs to be fast.
After receiving confirmation from her, the hanged man slowly got up and pulled up his hood before leaving the room. Having learned where Artisan Sealf was presently living, Cattleya removed her heavy glasses and pinched her glabella. Clapping, she said,
Heath, come in.
In the shadows of the door gap, the darkness suddenly stirred as a thin and tall but pale figure appeared. His nose bridge was ridiculously high, and his facial skin was nearly transparent. Looking ill, he was none other than the second mate of the future, Rose Bishop, Heath Doyle. Cattleya looked at him and said,
The actual situation is. I'll leave the rest to you.
Yes, Captain.
Heath Doyle simply replied before shrinking back into the shadows. Cattleya raised her right hand and paused for a few seconds.
Stay away from Frank for the time being. He had reached a standstill in his mushroom experiments. I'm afraid that he will come up with new ideas.
The location of my second marionette.
Klein held two branches as he repeatedly chanted without seeing them move. This meant a divination failure, or that Klein City didn't have a second marionette that suited him well.
From the looks of it, mysticism methods are temporarily useless. I'll pack up tomorrow and leave.
Klein mumbled and threw the branches into the trash can. Standing beside him was Enzo. Although he didn't dare to directly look at his master and was only looking at the ground, he skillfully made a cup of black tea and offered it to Klein. Compared to before, this winter now had red skin that was nearly peeling due to sunburn. After all of this turned for the better, he would have a swarthy tan. To disguise his new marionette and prevent the Rose School of Thought from recognizing him, Klein had brought this gentleman on a trip to the beach, which received strong sunlight. He was then left exposed to the sun for prolonged periods of time. Meanwhile, he controlled the marionette to shave off most of his hair, leaving a thin layer. With the trimming of his brows, contouring his face with powder, and wearing shades, Enzo seemed to transform into another person. Even the most familiar of friends of his might find it difficult to recognize him unless the person was a faceless. Apart from a disguise in the real world, Klein also did some mysticism management. Firstly, he used the paper angel's embrace, and second, he carried Azik's copper whistle along with it. In addition, he also determined that a winner's passive luck and calamity trait was ineffective. However, he had no idea if it was because of its status as a marionette or if it was due to the gray fog. Receiving the tea and taking a sip, Klein cast his gaze at the map of East and West Balaam on the coffee table. He considered where he could find his second marionette. At this moment, the colors around him suddenly saturated, as though an artist had contoured the area with paint. Right on the heels of that, a figure appeared beside Enzo. He was wearing a silk top hat and a black suit. With a medium build, he had bronze skin and eyes that seemed to see the vicissitudes of life. He had soft facial features, and beneath his right ear was a tiny black mole. He was none other than Azik Eggers.
Mr. Azik is finally here.
Klein was first delighted before he noticed that he had appeared beside his marionette. This made an amusing scene surface in his mind. Ataka, Subior. Mr. Azik, who had relied on the copper whistle to locate him, had done the same as he usually did, grabbing the copper whistle's wielder by the shoulder, and had left using the spirit world the moment he appeared. And all Klein could do was watch helplessly, trying to stop him with outstretched arms. But being a tad bit slow, he couldn't help but clam up. Azik appeared more reticent than before. Looking at Klein, who had a new face, he asked,
"Are you ready?"
Chapter 913. Klein's Preparatory Work.
Ready? Of course not.
Klein smiled as he pointed at Enzo.
That glove still needs sealing.
As he spoke, the badly sunburnt Enzo removed the human-skinned glove from his right hand, with his left hand which wore the flower of blood and green essence rings. It was Creeping Hunger. Normally, Klein tended to throw Creeping Hunger above the gray fog when it wasn't in use. After all, the glove's original seal had been disabled after its mutation. It needed to consume a living person on a daily basis, otherwise it would feast on the wearer. However, considering how Mr. Azik had already replied, it was very likely that he would meet him soon. Finally, he decided to keep Creeping Hunger in the real world unless there were unique circumstances. After all, he could already imagine the scene of Mr. Azik arriving. He didn't wish for such a conversation to happen. Didn't you say that the glove needs sealing? Yes. Give me a second. I need to use the washroom. Or, are you ready? No. Give me a second. I need to use the washroom. Just the thought of a similar scene and similar line embarrassed Klein, making him feel awkward. Even if he didn't consider the possibility of Mr. Azik realizing the secret of the gray fog, this would also affect his impression of him. Therefore, after obtaining a new marionette and completing his attempt at looking at himself, Klein brought Creeping Hunger back to the real world, making up for its previous meal. Unlike before, the wearer was now Enzo. Aside from that, to restrain Creeping Hunger's urge to eat a person on a daily basis, Klein carried a few normal mushrooms with him. He also made the marionette maintain a distance of at least 5 meters from him. Upon hearing his words and seeing the marionette's actions, Azik, male, nodded and reached out to receive the human-skinned glove. Taking this opportunity, Klein took out a few mushrooms from his pocket and threw them into the nearby trash can. Pah! He snapped his fingers, igniting the mushrooms within a scarlet flame. However, it didn't affect anything around it. This was his flame-controlling power from being a magician. After completing this action and seeing Mr. Azik inevitably glance over, Klein chuckled dryly.
The unforeseen development back then has made creeping hunger a little afraid of mushrooms. I'm using its weakness to restrain its usual urges.
In fact, there wasn't much point in doing so, because carrying the mushrooms restrained creeping hunger. It made the starving, sealed artifact immediately lash back the moment the mushrooms disappeared. Unless there was any easily obtainable food in front of it, it would end up aiding the enemy.
Mushroom.
Azik, male, muttered as he held the glove which had bloodstains on its surface. He made the surroundings suddenly turn dark as the sunlight outside was prohibited from entering. Ghastly white, dark green complicated symbols, labels, and patterns appeared out of thin air. They appeared to be calligraphed by invisible wraiths, shadows, and spirit bodies. They meshed together in mid-air, forming a mysterious, illusory double bronze door that seemed to lead to another world. It was a deep, silent, and terrifying world. The illusory door shrank and finally landed on creeping hunger, causing its bloodstains to rapidly recede, making it mostly white. A few seconds later, this human-skinned glove returned to normal. It was still a thin-layered glove, and even without any suppressive effect from the mushrooms, it didn't express any signs of mania or urges.
It's like how it was before.
Azik, male, handed creeping hunger to Klein. Klein reflected inwardly.
Having a big shot backing you sure feels good.
And earnestly thanked him before wearing creeping hunger on his left hand. He thought for a moment and raised a matter.
Mr. Azik, while I was carrying your copper whistle while passing through the Berserk Sea, I had the same dream repeatedly. The main theme of the dream is darkness and coldness. In an inverted underground mausoleum, there were countless coffins with a deceased body inside. On their backs were dense white feathers. Those feathers were tainted with pale yellow oil, and deep inside the mausoleum was a blob of black fog that enveloped everything. In the dream, you and I were exploring the mausoleum. We triggered something, causing the black fog to produce panting sounds as thin, illusory black tubes were extended. I would jolt myself awake whenever I reached this point in the dream. This seems to be similar to the byproduct of the Numinous Episcopat's artificial death project that previously appeared.
Klein described in detail his divination of the copper whistle as a dream. He did this as a warning to Mr. Azik, male, as if to say that he shouldn't be too careless. After all, dream divination was, in a sense, equivalent to a dream, and Azik, male, knew that he was a beyonder of the seer pathway. Having such an encounter wasn't anything odd. Having a revelation from a normal dream and getting a revelation from a dream divination only differed in one way, one being passive and the other active. Azik, male, finished listening silently without cutting Klein off. At the end of that, he nodded and said,
It's likely related to something death left in the Berserk Sea. From the looks of it, the Numinous Episcopat's artificial death project has had some qualitative progress.
Mr. Azik lives up to being a fourth epoch death console. He doesn't belittle my dream at all.
Klein raised his right hand and rubbed his face, turning into Gehrman Sparrow. He then said,
I only have one more thing I need to prepare. I need to confirm if Admiral Hell Ludwell isn't somewhere dangerous, and that there aren't any Numinous Episcopate demigods around him.
As for whether the Murloc cufflink was still on the ship, Klein didn't mention it. This was because he would check on it every few days. He believed that Admiral Hell had yet to discover the mystical item, or he might have already discovered it but had deliberately not moved it, hoping to lay an ambush for the crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow, when he visited. Azik, male, replied calmly.
That can be confirmed when we are nearby.
All right.
Klein immediately made Enzo walk to the coat rack and pull out the golden cane. Seeing that there was nothing else, Isaac, male, reached out his right hand and grabbed Klein's shoulder. Klein also reached out his right palm to grab onto Enzo's shoulder. The surrounding colors suddenly changed. The reds became redder, and the blacks became blacker. They stacked against each other but were bright and discordant. The two men and the marionette began passing through the spirit world as the black-gold inlaid cane danced ahead, pointing out the direction of Klein's lost Murloc cufflink. Before long, the cane fell down and was suspended in midair. Isaac, male, terminated the traveling, but they remained in the spirit world. He seemed to be watching something or listening in on something. After 2 to 3 seconds, he said,
There aren't any problems.
With that said, he brought Klein while Klein brought his marionette out of the spirit world. Meanwhile, Klein recalled the time he searched for clues to Isaac's male memories. Back then, the target was the ancient chronicles that Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy possessed. Back then, Isaac, male, had said the problem isn't serious, but in the end, he faced demoness of unaging Katerina. Klein lampooned.
There aren't any problems. All right, since you say so.
As he sized up his surroundings. It was a rather familiar environment. It was a huge ship with a mainly dark color with a ghostly green to it. It had a black tulip flag, as well as zombies, skeletons, wraiths, shadows, and other undying creatures. These creatures either directed the sails, patrolled the area, or did cannon drills. All of that proved that it was the flagship, Black Tulip of Admiral Hell. Unlike Klein's last encounter, the Black Tulip had quite a number of living beyonders. The silver-masked captain with an exaggerated rapier, frilly shirt, a gorgeous coat, and a triangular hat with a white skull on it, Admiral Hell Ludwell, male, was standing by the cabin's entrance looking over. Suddenly, the black ring on Ludwell's, male, right hand trembled and glimmered. The pale white flame in the arrogant pirate admiral's eyes wavered and finally constricted to its limits. Immediately, Ludwell, male, bent his back, prostrated to the ground in front of Isaac Eggers, male, and kissed the deck under the gaze of the either glazed, surprised, or lifeless eyes. Chapter 914, The Calling Deep Inside the Mausoleum. Upon seeing Admiral Hell Ludwell's reaction, Klein and the living crew of the Black Tulip could hardly believe their eyes. He originally imagined 2 scenarios. The first was Ludwell requesting help from a numinous episcopate demigod to ambush Gehrman Sparrow and the powerhouse backing him. This wasn't impossible since Sequence 7 of the Death Pathway was called Spirit Medium. They also had the ability to sense impending danger. The second was that Admiral Hell hadn't made any preparations. He tried resisting, but ended up being easily finished off by Mr. Isaac. Klein's plan was to have Mr. Isaac deal with the demigod while he hunted Admiral Hell in the first scenario, so as to obtain his second marionette. If it were the second scenario, he could request Mr. Isaac to watch by the side as he controlled his marionette to challenge Ludwell alone. During this process, he would use creeping hunger and hide in the shadows, doing his best to stay behind the scenes so as to digest his marionette potion faster. To his surprise, Admiral Hell didn't put up a fight at all. He directly prostrated himself and kissed the deck as though he was Isaac's most loyal and humble servant.
How are we going to come to blows now?
Klein stared ahead blankly, somewhat at a loss for words, and it was silent across the ship. Isaac raised his hand and pressed down on his silk hat as he walked towards the prostrating Ludwell at a decent pace. 1 step. 2 steps. 3 steps. He stopped in front of Ludwell and said with a deep voice,
What stage has the numinous episcopate's artificial death project reached?
Ludwell kept his forehead peeled to the ground as he hoarsely replied,
Artificial death can already influence high-sequence beyonders who failed their advancements, but it is still unable to reply to prayers and rituals.
After the description, he slightly raised his torso and took off the black, square-shaped ring from his right hand. Then, With both hands, he offered it in front of him. Silently, the ring seemed to be dragged by countless spirit bodies as it flew up and landed in Isaac's palm. Isaac studied it for a few seconds before wearing it on his left index finger. Suddenly, a terrifying and profound feeling was emanated from his body. The zombies and skeletons, who were either naked or wearing rotten leather armor, genuflected, bowing their heads as though they only dared to look at his boots. The flying wraiths and shadows landed on the deck and clung closely to it. None of them dared to float in midair again. Where? The other pirates aboard the ship plopped to their knees, plastering their faces to the deck without daring to raise them. Klein stood to the side, watching Mr. Isaac's back and the suddenly empty scene. He turned agape, but he didn't say a word. Isaac took another 2 steps forward and came to Admiral Hell's side. Then he turned his body and faced Klein and said to Ludwell,
"You shall be his marionette for a year. When the time is up, you can return to the spirit world."
Isaac said those words without any inflection, as though he wasn't determining Admiral Hell's life and death or future. Perhaps, to him, this was a trivial matter that didn't need him to care for the thoughts and feelings of the person being ordered. Ludwell's body shook violently, as though he was furious and indignant. But ultimately, he didn't raise his head. He continued keeping his head peeled to the deck.
Yes, Honorable Death Consul.
Just as he said that, ghastly white and dark green mysterious symbols were accentuated as they meshed together, forming an illusory bronze door. The door rapidly contracted and was imprinted inside Admiral Hell's forehead. Klein looked in surprise and puzzlement. Only when Mr. Isaac nodded at him and pointed to Admiral Hell did he blankly step forward and enter a 10-meter radius. He began controlling Ludwell's spirit body threads. The pirate admiral almost leaped up a few times to flail his arms, but none of that happened. Soon his thoughts turned sluggish as he subconsciously resisted. After a while, the silver-masked Admiral Hell Ludwell stood up. Bowing his head, he retreated to Klein's side and stood beside Winner Enzo. Isaac watched the entire process in silence before finally slowly saying,
In the death pathway, high-level beyonders have extremely suppressive powers over low-level beyonders.
I can tell. Back when I threw your copper whistle, even the Sequence 5 Admiral Hell failed to control his undead creatures.
Klein nodded gently, indicating that he had taken note of it. Immediately after that, a zombie which had rotted in several areas rose up. Carrying an azure blue cufflink, it came before Klein. It was the Murloc cufflink he had lost.
Although it's useless for the current me, I've finally gotten it back.
As Klein was lost in poignancy, he reached out to retrieve the item that belonged to him. Then, he saw Mr. Isaac walk back and reach out to grab his shoulder. He hurriedly extended his arms to grab onto the shoulders of his marionettes, Enzo and Ludwell. All the colors saturated, brightened, and overlapped. Having entered the spirit world, Klein instinctively asked,
Mr. Isaac, where do we go next?
Berserk Sea.
Isaac calmly replied. He paused for a moment and then added,
Give me the copper whistle.
All right.
Klein made Enzo take out the iron cigar case and retrieve the ancient cigar case. Isaac reached out and took it before saying in a deep voice,
My intuition tells me that this ring left by death, together with this copper whistle and myself, should allow us to find the spot in the Berserk Sea where death perished back then.
Klein subconsciously said,
My dream tells me that it's very dangerous. Perhaps we should first find the numinous episcopate members who are implementing the artificial death project. We can make decisions after receiving more detailed information from them.
Isaac fell silent for a few seconds.
A voice there is calling out to me.
Klein turned his head to look at Mr. Isaac. He saw that this man with soft facial features and weathered eyes had his facial contours furrowed. He no longer had that slight curve to his lips. Colors flashed by quickly as Isaac brought Klein through the pitch-black storm that enveloped the Berserk Sea. At this moment, the dark square ring and the exquisite ancient brass whistle shimmered slightly, illuminating Isaac's face. This death consul, who had lived through the fourth epoch, closed his eyes as he silently listened to a shout that came from an unknown location. Then he suddenly clenched his right hand. All the scenery from the nearby spirit world was imploding, turning into a slowly spinning black vortex whose borders couldn't be seen. The vortex suddenly burgeoned, devouring Isaac, Klein, and his two marionettes. Klein sensed a sudden and intense sense of dizziness as he nearly vomited on the spot. He recovered after an unknown period of time, realizing that he was inside a dark, cold mausoleum. Around him were open coffins, and inside them were rotting corpses with white feathers on their backs.
Although I warned Mr. Isaac, we still ended up here.
Klein was taken aback for a second as he suddenly felt a deep sense of helplessness. He turned his head to look to the side and saw Isaac standing near him. He was staring intently at the flights of stairs that led deep into the mausoleum. There was a thick black gas emanating in the area as they slowly swirled like smog.
The one hiding in there might very well be artificial death.
Klein couldn't help but warn. Isaac's facial contours were no longer as taut as he curved the corners of his mouth.
My slumber from before has allowed me to recall many more things. I saw myself seated on a bone throne, and I saw beyonders and ordinary people lying dead in front of the throne. They hadn't done anything wrong, but they died sudden deaths all the same. One by one they got up, turning into ghastly, undead creatures that pledged allegiance to me. And I was just coldly watching them without any emotional fluctuations. I allowed the disaster to spread through the village and into the city. This made me feel unlike myself. However, I also knew very well that this might be the real me.
As Death Consul from the Fourth Epoch's Balam Empire?
Klein's lips quivered slightly before he pursed them tightly. Isaac rubbed his temples and continued in an unperturbed tone.
I sense myself returning to that past.
Chapter 915, Another Me. Without waiting for Klein's reply, Isaac, who was staring intently deep into the mausoleum, continued.
I still remember my resurrection after my first death. I was lying in a pale white coffin, and I staggered to my feet. I was feeling horrified, having no idea what was happening, nor did I know where I was. Before the clergyman collected my corpse for purification, I escaped, stumbling along the way like a wandering ghost. I crossed grasslands, villagers, and cities. I couldn't recall who I was or where I came from. No matter where I went back then, I would hear all kinds of sobbing. When I watched priests presiding over mass burials, I felt sorrow in every corner. Later, I happened to rescue a noble lady and entered her manor. She was a bright and lively girl, and I was like a feral beast from the jungle. I was sensitive, suspicious, self-abased, afraid, and I often showed a cold, indifferent, cruel side that didn't match the morality of a human. She was very curious about me. No matter how I avoided her or what terrible things I did, she would approach me, infecting me with her smile. She would use interesting matters to influence me, and without realizing it, I got used to her pranks and her existence. We secretly got together. She was very worried that her father wouldn't agree to her marriage to a former tramp and present servant. Seeing her melancholic smile, I had the feeling of blood gushing through me for the first time. I rashly told her that I was leaving, but I would return with an aristocratic title and a bridal garland. I joined the army, becoming a knight. I raised a 3-meter lance and charged at enemies. Thanks to the chaos of the Fourth Epoch's wake in the northern continent, I became a baron and obtained a fief I could call my own. I abided by my promise, and with the king's conferment letter, family emblem, a knight's medal ribbon, and my self-made garland, I married my bride.
Upon saying this, Isaac's expression gradually turned gentle, as though he was reminiscing and recalling something. The corners of his mouth curled up without him realizing it. Klein's heart stirred from hearing this, as though he had met the familiar Mr. Isaac again. He carefully guided the conversation.
What happened next?
Isaac looked ahead and said,
Later, we built a castle on our fief. We had children, a boy. He grew up very quickly, and I could tell that he would grow up to be tall and stout. He enjoyed combat, often running around while dragging a broadsword, claiming that he wanted to become a knight. I thought it was just child's talk that wouldn't last. However, even if he broke his leg or hurt his head, he didn't abandon his training. He thought that I wouldn't be able to see him if he hid in his room grimacing while tending to his wound. He underestimated his father. All the spirits in the five were secretly under my service. Year after year passed. I recovered more and more of my memories. My wife often grumbled that the castle was too cold and dark and that she wished to go somewhere with sunlight and warmth. I satisfied her request, but it was only much later that I realized that it wasn't because she disliked staying in the castle, but that she was afraid of the changes happening to me. She was afraid of the colder me who was becoming a stranger. She never told me these things, spending time with me like she always did. We spent a beautiful time by the seaside in the south, and we even thought of having a second child, but unfortunately, we didn't succeed. It was only when I sensed that my next death was approaching did I return to the fief, to my castle. My son, that boy, told me that he wished to head to Backland to become an attendant to viscounts or earls and begin his journey as a knight. I asked him why he had made such a choice when he was only around 10. He told me that I was his idol and role model. He wished to become a noble by being a knight like me without the help of his parents. Back then, I had already recovered most of my memories. Faced with that child, I always felt a little awkward, unfamiliar, and uncomfortable. But when I heard his answer, I still felt an indescribable joy, satisfaction, and pride. He was my son, completely different from the children I had back when I was in the Balaam Empire.
Klein knew that Mr. Azik was talking about his identity as Baron Lamud I. And the child who made him proud and satisfied had been poisoned to death in his middle age or advanced years. He was nailed in a coffin and even had his skull taken away by Insangwil. Azik's gaze went adrift for a moment.
I died once again and woke up in a groggy manner. I instinctively left my fief and followed my prior arrangements to wander elsewhere. Every incarnation, I had a different life in the beginning. At times I met with the sweetest love. At other times I received the most adorable daughter. The love, helplessness, and satisfaction left me taken aback, puzzled, and stumped again and again as I gradually recovered my memories. There was once a time where I was a filial son. I gave my parents pride, a beautiful life, adorable grandsons and granddaughters. But when I awoke and found myself, I recalled that in my previous incarnation, I had coldly watched their real son die in the battlefield and had seized his identity. On the one hand, I felt pain and guilt, and on the other hand, I felt it was nothing, something trivial. My inner heart seemed to dissociate into two. Back then, I had a mask that allowed me to change into anyone, but I lost it after awakening. This might have been something I deliberately lost.
Klein recalled Mr. Azik's mention of a daughter who liked getting sweets from him. After some deliberation, he asked,
I believe that it isn't a dissociation, but that you are fighting against madness. After losing your past memories, you, who restart your life, are always kind and warm, with rich emotions. At your present state, you probably recognize it even clearer. This might very well be the true you, your essence. And as a death console, you suffer the effects of the Beyonder characteristics' latent inclination towards losing control. You suffer the influence brought about by a high-level death pathway Beyonder. I heard that he had already gone mad after the War of the Four Emperors.
Klein's words weren't without much evidence, because he only knew a few of Azik's incarnations. Baron Lamud, the father who made a swing for his daughter, the filial child, and the warm and friendly history teacher. His goal was to provide a guess, a possibility to help Mr. Azik resist the death console personality that came with his memories. It allowed him to introspect his past incarnations and use this to achieve a particular compromise with himself that wouldn't be too cold. And as he spoke, he suddenly had a new idea. Without waiting for Azik to finish digesting what he had said, he hurriedly asked,
Mr. Azik, do you know about an anchor? To secure themselves, the deities and angels use anchors to prevent the beyonder characteristics' inclination towards losing control and stop madness from corrupting them.
Yes.
Ozzik retracted his gaze and nodded. Klein wasn't too sure, but he used a rather firm tone and said,
Perhaps your repeated memory loss to restart and live a new life is the anchor you use to resist madness and the loss of control.
After saying that, Klein added inwardly,
Do not abandon them. Do not forget them. That is you.
Ozzik repeated this word as his mind seemed lost. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly sighed.
This might be an explanation. At least, it lessens the intensity of my mental dissociation and conflicts. However, since I've already come this far, I should still head inside the mausoleum to see what's hiding there. Why is it summoning me, and what is causing me to die and revive again and again, losing my memories during the process only to find them again? This has troubled me for more than 1,000 years. It has troubled my every incarnation. I believe I can receive an answer today.
The look in his eyes turned clearer as his voice seemed gentle, but there was an indescribable firmness in it. Klein wanted to stop him, but moments after he opened his mouth, he closed it again. Maprozig pressed down on his half-top hat. Without turning his head, he said with a gentle smile,
Remember to close your eyes.
With that said, he walked forward, following the flights of stairs as he headed for the deep depths of the mausoleum. The wafting black fog didn't produce any more panting sounds. It slowly scattered into its surroundings, accentuating the illusory object that was coiled at the bottom. It was a massive feathered serpent that seemed to occupy an entire island. It had huge, dark green, nearly black scales. Amidst the gaps were feathers covered in yellow, oily stains. On every feather there were thin, illusory black tubes extending outwards. The exaggerated feathered serpent was both illusory and real. Its actual form was hardly describable. It seemed to be a combination of things incomprehensible to humans. Its eye sockets were burning with pale white flames. Its face was that of a human's. The face had bronze skin, and it had soft facial features. Beneath its right ear was a tiny black mole. It was another Ozzik Eggers.